September 27th, 2024. The sun sets over Beirut, but the night will not be calm. Deep beneath the bustling streets of the Dahieh suburb, a man sits in the heart of a fortress. He is a ghost, a phantom who has haunted Israel for over 3 decades. He is Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, and he believes he is untouchable. For 32 years, he has commanded one of the most powerful paramilitary forces in the world. He has outsmarted assassins, survived wars, and built a state within a state. His security is the stuff of legend, a web of paranoia and precision. He moves in shadows, speaks from undisclosed locations, and trusts almost no one. A source familiar with his thinking would later say, right up until he was assassinated, Hassan Nasrallah did not believe that Israel would kill him. He was wrong. In the skies above, Israeli F-15I fighter jets are closing in. They are not carrying standard munitions. They are armed with something far more powerful, designed for a very specific purpose: to reach a man buried 60 feet underground and erase him from existence. This is not just another airstrike. This is the final act of a long and bloody play. This is Operation New Order. But above that bunker, in the buildings that will soon be reduced to rubble, families are going about their evening routines. Children are doing homework. Mothers are preparing dinner. They have no idea that in minutes, their world will explode. This is the story of an assassination that changed the Middle East, but it is also the story of the price paid by those who had no say in the matter. To understand the end, you must first understand the beginning. The strike on September 27th was not an isolated event. It was the final, crushing blow in a month that had brought Hezbollah to its knees. September 2024 was the month Israel dismantled its most formidable enemy, piece by piece. But it was also the month that Lebanon bled like never before. It began with a stroke of genius, or, depending on your perspective, a violation of international norms that would set a dangerous precedent. On September 17th and 18th, thousands of pagers and walkie-talkies carried by Hezbollah operatives suddenly exploded. These weren't random malfunctions. This was a coordinated attack, orchestrated by Mossad. The numbers were staggering: 42 people killed, over 3,500 injured. A Reuters report cited a Hezbollah official admitting that 1,500 of their fighters were instantly taken out of action. The communication network that held the group together was shattered, replaced by chaos and fear. But the casualties were not limited to combatants. Children were injured. Civilians standing near Hezbollah members were maimed. In one case, a young girl lost her father when his pager exploded as he held her hand in a grocery store. Hezbollah, in a rare admission of vulnerability, called it a possible declaration of war. Human rights organizations called it something else, a potential war crime. The indiscriminate nature of the attack, they argued, violated the principle of distinction, a cornerstone of international humanitarian law that requires parties to a conflict to distinguish between combatants and civilians. Israel, as it often does, remains silent on its involvement, neither confirming nor denying responsibility. But Israel was just getting started. 2 days later, on September 20th, another precision strike rocked Beirut. This time, the target was Ibrahim Akil, the commander of the elite Redwan Force, Hezbollah's Special Operations Unit. He was killed alongside other senior commanders in a strike on a residential building in the Dahieh suburb. The head of the snake was being systematically severed from its body. But with each strike, more civilians died. The building that housed the meeting also housed families. At least 14 people were killed, including women and children who had nothing to do with Hezbollah's military operations. Then came the fire. On September 23rd, Israel unleashed a massive air campaign across Lebanon. For days, the sky rained down destruction. The goal was not just to hit military targets, but to create unbearable pressure on Hezbollah and the Lebanese government. Over 700 people were killed in just 4 days, according to Lebanon's health ministry. More than 5,000 were injured, and an estimated 1 million Lebanese civilians, roughly a quarter of the country's population, were forced to flee their homes, creating a humanitarian crisis on a scale not seen since the 2006 war. Lebanon's Prime Minister, Najib Mikati, watched in horror, denouncing the campaign as a war of extermination. The world watched too. On the world stage, a different narrative was playing out. On September 27th, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stood before the United Nations General Assembly in New York. He spoke of Israel's desire for peace, but his words were laced with iron. He vowed that the campaign against Hezbollah would continue until its threat was neutralized. He held up a map, declaring that Israel would not rest until its northern border was secure. As he spoke those words, The pilots of the 69th Squadron were likely already in their cockpits, thousands of miles away. The order had been given. The time for diplomacy was over. The time for Operation New Order had come. The assassination of Hassan Nasrallah was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was the culmination of an intelligence operation that spanned more than 2 decades. It was a story of patience, penetration, and the relentless pursuit of a single man. But to understand why Israel was so obsessed with eliminating him, you need to understand who Hassan Nasrallah was and what he represented. Hassan Nasrallah was not born into power. He was born in 1960 in the impoverished Karantina district of eastern Beirut, a world away from the palaces of Middle Eastern leaders. His father ran a small grocery store, barely scraping by. The family was poor, devout, and deeply rooted in Lebanon's Shia community, a sect that had been marginalized and oppressed for generations. Young Hassan was the oldest of 9 children, and from an early age, he showed a hunger for learning and a devotion to his faith that set him apart. In 1975, when Hassan was just 15, Lebanon descended into a brutal civil war that would last 15 years and claim over 120,000 lives. His world was torn apart. He joined the Amal movement, a Shia political party fighting for the rights of Lebanon's marginalized Shia population. But when Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982, ostensibly to drive out the Palestine Liberation Organization, Nasrallah saw something that changed him forever. He saw the power of resistance, the power of martyrdom, and the power of Iran's revolutionary ideology, which promised to turn the oppressed into the powerful. He left Amal and joined a new, more radical group that was forming in the chaos of the invasion: Hezbollah, the Party of God. Backed by Iran and driven by a fierce hatred of Israel and the West, Hezbollah was not just a militia, it was a movement, a vision of Islamic resistance that would reshape the Middle East. For Nasrallah, it was a calling. In 1992, at just 32 years old, Nasrallah was elected Secretary General of Hezbollah after his predecessor, Abbas al-Musawi, was assassinated by Israel in a helicopter strike. It was a turning point, not just for Nasrallah, but for the entire region. Under his leadership, Hezbollah transformed from a guerrilla force into something far more dangerous and, to many in Lebanon, far more essential. He built a political party that provided social services, schools, and hospitals to Lebanon's Shia community, filling the void left by a weak and corrupt Lebanese government. In the impoverished villages of southern Lebanon, Hezbollah became the state. They paid salaries to families of martyrs, rebuilt homes destroyed by Israeli airstrikes, and provided health care to those who had none. To many Lebanese Shia, Nasrallah was not a terrorist. He was a savior. But he also built a military wing that became more powerful than the Lebanese army itself. With Iranian money and training, Hezbollah amassed an arsenal estimated at over 150,000 rockets and missiles, some capable of reaching deep into Israel. He built a network of tunnels along the Israeli border, trained elite commando units, and established alliances with Iran, Syria, and other militant groups, turning Hezbollah into the vanguard of what he called the axis of resistance. His speeches were legendary. He spoke with a calm, measured tone, but his words were fire. He called for the destruction of Israel, which he referred to as a cancerous tumor that had to be removed. He praised suicide bombers as martyrs and vowed that Hezbollah would never lay down its arms. To his supporters, he was a hero, a defender of the oppressed. To his enemies, he was a terrorist, a man with blood on his hands. To neutral observers, he was something more complex. A shrewd political operator who understood power, a charismatic leader who inspired fierce loyalty, and a ruthless military commander who was willing to sacrifice everything for his cause. And he was very, very good at staying alive. Since taking over Hezbollah in 1992, Nasrallah had been Israel's white whale. Multiple assassination attempts had failed. In 2006, Israel came close, bombing a bunker where they believed he was hiding, but Nasrallah had left just hours before. He learned from each attempt, tightening his security, reducing his circle of trust, and becoming a ghost. The 2006 Lebanon War was Nasrallah's moment of glory, and also the moment that sealed his fate. It began with a Hezbollah ambush on an Israeli border patrol, which led to the capture of 2 Israeli soldiers. Israel responded with overwhelming force, launching a massive air and ground campaign designed to crush Hezbollah once and for all. But Nasrallah was ready. Hezbollah fighters, armed with advanced anti-tank missiles supplied by Iran and hidden in fortified bunkers, inflicted heavy casualties on the IDF. Rockets rained down on northern Israel, forcing hundreds of thousands to flee or live in bomb shelters for weeks. The war lasted 34 days and ended in what many saw as a stalemate. But for Nasrallah, it was a victory. Hezbollah had stood toe-to-toe with one of the most powerful militaries in the world and survived. His popularity soared, not just in Lebanon but across the Arab world. He became a symbol of defiance, a man who had bloodied the nose of the Israeli giant. But that popularity came at a devastating cost. The war killed over 1,200 people in Lebanon, the vast majority of them civilians. Entire neighborhoods in Beirut were reduced to rubble. Over 1 million people were displaced. The Lebanese economy, already fragile, was shattered, and it put Nasrallah squarely in the crosshairs of Israeli intelligence. From that moment on, Israel made it a priority to track his every move, to map his network, and to wait for the perfect moment to strike. Nasrallah knew this. He became obsessed with security. He stopped appearing in public, conducting all his speeches via video link from undisclosed locations. He moved constantly, never sleeping in the same place twice. He communicated through a network of trusted couriers, avoiding phones and electronic devices. He was a ghost, a phantom who existed in the shadows. But even ghosts leave traces. As Nasrallah built his empire, Israel's intelligence agencies were watching. Mossad, Unit 8200, the entire Israeli intelligence community was focused on one goal: to create a complete, comprehensive picture of Hezbollah. As one military analyst from the Royal United Services Institute would later put it, Israel likely spent years building up and sustaining a comprehensive intelligence picture, which involved a critical element of human sources involved to keep it current. This deep penetration stood in stark contrast to the catastrophic intelligence failure that missed the Hamas attack on October 7, 2023. The prevailing theory, supported by interviews with former Israeli intelligence officials published in Haaretz, is that Israel had become so fixated on the existential threat from the north, from Lebanon and its Iranian backers, that it tragically took its eye off the ball in Gaza. The result was the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust, with over 1,200 Israelis killed in a single day. For years, Mossad chipped away at Nasrallah's security. They recruited sources, tracked movements, and mapped out the intricate network of bunkers and safe houses he used to survive. The New York Times would later publish a detailed investigation, revealing the astonishing extent of this penetration. Israeli spies had planted tracking devices on Hezbollah's rockets, giving them a map of hidden munitions depots. They had turned insiders, creating a web of informants that reached into the highest echelons of the organization. They had even, according to some reports, infiltrated the construction crews that built Nasrallah's bunkers, allowing them to map the underground complexes in precise detail. One of the most tantalizing, and still unconfirmed, reports came from the French newspaper Le Parisien. It claimed the final piece of the puzzle. The mole who gave the green light on September 27th was not Lebanese, but Iranian. If true, it would represent the ultimate betrayal. A crack, pager attacks, and the assassination of his top commanders. He couldn't stay hidden forever. He needed to meet his surviving leadership face to face, to project strength, to formulate a response. And that need, that human need to lead in a moment of crisis, is what killed him. Israeli intelligence knew this. They had been watching the specific bunker in Haret Hreek for a long time. It was a fortress, built with Iranian engineering, buried 60 feet beneath a residential area, a perfect human shield. The bunker was designed to withstand conventional airstrikes, with reinforced concrete walls several feet thick and multiple layers of protection. But Israel had the key. They had the precise coordinates, and they had the weapon to crack it open. The commander of the Hatzarim Air Base, Brigadier General Amichai Levine, would later describe the two main challenges of such an elimination operation in an interview with Israeli media. First, precise intelligence. You need to know not just where the target is, but who else is there, what the structure looks like, and how deep you need to strike. Second, ensuring the target does not escape while the planes are en route. There could be no leaks, no early warnings. The window of opportunity would be measured in minutes, perhaps seconds. For several days, the pilots of the 69th Squadron prepared for the mission. They knew the target was high value, but its identity was kept secret until the final hours. They trained for a complex, simultaneous strike, a symphony of destruction designed to overwhelm any defense and ensure a kill. They studied the target area, memorized the coordinates, and rehearsed the timing. Everything had to be perfect. As Netanyahu finished his speech in New York, the final intelligence came in. Nasrallah was on the move. He was heading to the bunker in Heret Hrik for an emergency meeting with his surviving commanders. The trap was set. The ghost was about to become a target, but so were the families living in the buildings above. The jets were F-15Is, the workhorses of the Israeli Air Force, some of the most advanced fighter bombers in the world. But the payload they carried was anything but ordinary. Video released by the IDF would later show them laden with what experts identified as American-made BLU-109 bombs, also known as GBU-27s. These are 2,000-pound bunker busters, designed to penetrate hardened concrete and steel before detonating deep underground. Ironically, these were the very same class of bombs the Biden administration had reportedly withheld from Israel for use in the dense urban environment of Gaza. But this was different, Israel argued. This was not about clearing a building. This was about collapsing a subterranean fortress and eliminating the most dangerous terrorist in the Middle East. The plan was audacious, not one or two bombs, but a relentless barrage. The final count, according to Israeli military sources, was 83 bombs, over 100 munitions in total, dropped in a rapid, overwhelming sequence. An Israeli Air Force officer described it as a bomb being dropped every 2 seconds for nearly 3 minutes. The result was apocalyptic. 4 residential buildings above the bunker were hit. 3 were completely obliterated, leaving nothing but smoldering craters that reached down to the bunker itself. The ground shook as if from an earthquake. The shockwave shattered windows for miles around. Entire city blocks were damaged. For those on the ground, it was a scene from hell. Dust and smoke filled the air. The screams of the wounded echoed through the streets. Rescue workers, many of them Hezbollah members themselves, dug frantically through the rubble, searching for survivors. Initial estimates from local hospitals put the death toll as high as 300. The official Lebanese count, released days later, was more conservative: 33 killed, 195 injured. But the message was clear: no place was safe. Not even 60 feet underground, surrounded by concrete and steel, in the heart of Hezbollah's stronghold. Israel's justification was swift and uncompromising. Nasrallah intentionally built Hezbollah's central headquarters under residential buildings in Dahiya, an IDF spokesman stated. For them, any civilian casualties were the tragic but necessary cost of eliminating a man who had held the region hostage for decades. They argued that Hezbollah's use of civilian areas as shields was itself a war crime, and that they had taken every precaution to minimize civilian harm. But critics, including Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, questioned this narrative. Was it proportionate to drop 83 bombs on a residential area to kill one man, no matter how dangerous? Did Israel truly take every precaution, or did the desire to ensure the kill override concerns about civilian casualties? These are questions that international law demands we ask, even if the answers are uncomfortable. For 2 days, the world held its breath. Hezbollah was silent, refusing to confirm or deny Nasrallah's fate. Had he escaped? Was this another near miss? The silence was deafening, and for those who knew Hezbollah, it was telling. Then, on September 28th, the IDF made the official announcement. Hassan Nasrallah was dead. The next day, his body was recovered from the rubble, finally confirming the end of an era. Also killed in the strike were Ali Karaki, the commander of Hezbollah's southern front, and Abbas Nilfarushan, a high-ranking commander in Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps and the deputy commander of the Quds Force. It was a decapitation strike of stunning efficiency. But also killed were civilians whose names we will never know, whose stories will never be told, whose deaths will be recorded as collateral damage in a war they did not choose. The death of Hassan Nasrallah was more than just the elimination of a single leader. It was a seismic shock that ripped through the Middle East. It was a demonstration of Israel's terrifying intelligence reach and its ruthless willingness to use it. It was a message to Iran, to Hezbollah, and to every enemy of the state. We can reach you, no matter where you hide. But it was also a moment that forced the world to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of modern warfare, the limits of acceptable force, and the price we are willing to pay for security. In the immediate aftermath, Hezbollah was paralyzed. The organization that had prided itself on discipline and secrecy was suddenly leaderless, its command structure shattered. Within days, Hezbollah announced a new leader, Naim Qassem, Nasrallah's longtime deputy. But the question on everyone's mind was whether anyone could fill the void left by Nasrallah. He had been more than a military commander. He was the face, the voice, and the soul of Hezbollah. He was the man who had transformed a ragtag militia into a regional power. Could Qassem, a cleric with little military experience, command the same loyalty and respect? For Israel, the assassination was a triumph, but it came with risks. Nasrallah was now a martyr, and martyrs have a way of becoming more powerful in death than they ever were in life. His face appeared on posters across Lebanon, Syria, and Iran. His speeches were replayed endlessly on Hezbollah's Al-Manar TV. Massive crowds gathered for symbolic funerals in Beirut, Tehran, and Baghdad, and the calls for revenge grew louder. Iran, Hezbollah's patron and protector, was humiliated. The strike had killed not just Nasrallah, but also one of their own senior commanders, Abbas Nilfarushan. It was a direct blow to the Revolutionary Guard Corps, a message that even their most protected assets were vulnerable. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, vowed retaliation, declaring that the blood of the martyrs will not be in vain. But the question was how and when. Would they strike directly at Israel, risking a full-scale war that could draw in the United States? Or would they bide their time, waiting for the perfect moment to exact their revenge through proxies? The broader implications were equally profound. The assassination came at a time when the Middle East was already on a knife's edge. The war in Gaza had been raging for nearly a year, with tens of thousands dead and no end in sight. The conflict between Israel and Hezbollah had been simmering since October 8, 2023, the day after Hamas's attack, when Hezbollah fired its first rockets in solidarity with the Palestinian cause. From that moment, the border between Israel and Lebanon had become a war zone. Hezbollah launched 1,900 cross-border attacks, according to IDF statistics. Israel responded with 8,300 strikes. The assassination of Nasrallah was meant to break this cycle, to decapitate Hezbollah and force it to the negotiating table. But history has shown that killing leaders rarely ends conflicts. It often just makes them more brutal, more unpredictable. The assassination of Osama bin Laden did not end al-Qaeda. The killing of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi did not end ISIS. And the elimination of Nasrallah, many experts warned, would not end Hezbollah. On November 27, 2024, 2 months after Nasrallah's death, a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Lebanon went into effect. Brokered by the United States and France, it was hailed as a breakthrough, a chance for peace. The terms were clear. Hezbollah would withdraw its forces from the border area, and Israel would cease its airstrikes. Lebanese army troops, backed by UN peacekeepers, would deploy to the south to ensure compliance. But violations occurred almost immediately. Rockets were fired from Lebanon, though it was unclear if they were launched by Hezbollah or rogue factions. Israeli drones continued to fly over Lebanese airspace, and the fragile truce seemed to hang by a thread. The question that remains is, what comes next? Can an organization built so completely around one man survive his demise? Has Israel truly broken the back of Hezbollah, or has it merely created a martyr, sowing the seeds for a new generation of leaders, even more radical and determined to seek revenge? The legacy of Hassan Nasrallah is one of blood, fire, and the unwavering belief in a cause that, for him, was worth any price. To his supporters, he was a hero who stood up to Israel when no one else would, who gave dignity to the oppressed, and who never wavered in his commitment to resistance. To his enemies, he was a terrorist who orchestrated attacks that killed hundreds, who turned Lebanon into an Iranian proxy state, and who brought nothing but suffering to his own people. The truth, as is often the case, lies somewhere in between. The story of his death is a testament to the cold, brutal calculus of modern warfare, where technology and intelligence can erase a lifetime of power in a matter of seconds. But it is also a story that raises profound moral questions. In the pursuit of security, how many civilian lives are we willing to sacrifice? When does a targeted killing become an act of terrorism itself? And who gets to decide? International law is clear on some points. The principle of proportionality requires that the harm caused by an attack must not be excessive in relation to the military advantage gained. The principle of distinction requires that parties to a conflict must distinguish between combatants and civilians. And the principle of precaution requires that all feasible measures must be taken to minimize civilian harm. Did the assassination of Nasrallah meet these standards? Israel argues yes, pointing to the immense military advantage gained by eliminating Hezbollah's leader, and the fact that Nasrallah deliberately placed his headquarters under civilian buildings. Critics argue no, pointing to the scale of the attack, the number of bombs dropped, and the inevitable civilian casualties that resulted. The International Criminal Court, which has jurisdiction over war crimes committed in the region, has not yet opened an investigation into the strike. But the questions remain, and they will continue to haunt this operation for years to come. What makes this story so compelling and so terrifying is not just the scale of the operation, but the patience behind it. This was not a crime of passion. This was a crime of calculation. For over 20 years, Israeli intelligence worked to build a picture so complete, so detailed, that when the moment came, there was no escape. They knew where he would be, who he would be with, and exactly how deep they would have to strike to reach him. The operation itself, dropping 83 bombs simultaneously on a single target, was a feat of military coordination that few nations could pull off. It required perfect intelligence, perfect timing, and perfect execution. One mistake, one leak, one moment of hesitation, and Nasrallah would have vanished back into the shadows. But there was no mistake, there was no leak, and when the dust settled, the man who had defined Hezbollah for a generation was gone. The new order he was so desperate to prevent has arrived, but whether it brings peace or an even more terrible conflict, only time will tell. What is certain is that the Middle East has changed. The rules of the game have shifted, and the message has been sent. No bunker is deep enough, no security tight enough, and no leader untouchable enough to escape the reach of those who hunt in the shadows. But that message cuts both ways. For every action, there is a reaction. For every assassination, there is a vow of revenge. And in a region where blood feuds can last generations, the killing of Hassan Nasrallah may not be the end of the story. It may just be the beginning of the next chapter. This was the story of how Mossad eliminated Hezbollah's most powerful commander. This was the story of Hassan Nasrallah. But it is also the story of the thousands who died in the campaign that led to his death, the millions who were displaced, and the questions that remain about the price of security in an age of endless war. The sources for this account include reports from the New York Times, Reuters, The Guardian, CNN, the Associated Press, the Jerusalem Post, Haaretz, Al Jazeera, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, the United Nations, and statements from the Israeli Defense Forces, the Lebanese government, and Hezbollah. Where information remains unconfirmed or disputed, this has been noted. In a conflict as complex and controversial as this, the truth is often the first casualty.